Welcome to the Magic of Positive Thinking, a podcast hosted by Norb Savannasini, founder of AmericanEagle.com, and writer Al Edwards. Norb, it's a beautiful day here in Chicago, and the warm weather just makes you feel great, doesn't it?
It's just beautiful, and you know, we have to thank God for this gift He gives us every day. That's why it's called the present.
That's right.
And it's just beautiful. And for anybody who's watching us on YouTube, which I think is about 15 people now.
Yeah.
You notice we have a new logo on this microphone
That's right.
advertises our show. And that's really in the radio business when you really get to be big.
When you make
it.
Yeah.
Just so you guys know. Okay.
We were just told by our producer, Brian, that we're the only podcast at AmericanEagle.com with our own mic flag. So we're very proud of that. And thank you, Brian, for arranging that for us. So we appreciate it. See, we're either really successful or when you co-host the show with the founder of the company, you get your own mic flag. That's what it is, I think.
Right,
yeah. So I think it's the latter.
It took a long time, but
it did.
I managed to push it through. Yeah.
Very good. Well, friends, we're so great to be with you again. It's officially spring 2026. And I don't know about you, but the winters have their own beauty, but they're hard. They're tough with the cold and the dark and...
Yeah, but one of the advantages of living in Chicago is that not only do you have the 4 seasons regular, but in the month of March, which we're in, you can actually have the 4 seasons
in 1 week
in that month. Yeah. So we've had rain, we've had snow, hail, zero. I mean, we've had everything. But you know what? It's poor people out in the West don't have any water. And in Nebraska, there's huge fires. In Hawaii, the homes are falling down the cliffs. So I'll take it here.
We'll take a little Illinois seasonality. Like Very good. Well, friends, over the last 4 years now, we have talked a lot about some really significant people in history. And one of the things we always emphasize is the fact that these people really were no different than Norb or I or you, our dear listeners. And that really should bring us inspiration to do whatever we want to do with our life. And we're going to talk about a guy that we've never even mentioned before, which I'm a little surprised about, and that is Charles Lindbergh, the famous aviator. And we want to talk about his life and the extraordinary thing he did. But before we do that, Norb wanted to start us out with something. So go ahead, Norb.
Yeah, I had a kind of an interesting thing this week happen to me. I've listened to this before many, many times, but I knew we were going to talk about Lindbergh today. And as I was driving, I listen to music, and I always program the music, the positive music.
Sure.
And old music, since I'm old. But I was listening to Louis Armstrong singing When You Wish Upon a Star.
Wow.
And I actually downloaded the words because they're very simple. Doesn't take too much time. But I think this probably really, really signifies what America used to really be. And, of course, it's a Walt Disney from a movie. Jiminy Cricket sang it.
Yeah.
And it says, when you wish upon a star, it makes no difference who you are. Anything your heart desires will come to you. If your heart is in your dream, no request is too extreme. When you wish upon a star, as dreamers do, like a bolt out of the blue, fate steps in and sees you through. When you wish upon a star, your dreams come true.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Isn't that beautiful?
Now, everyone knows that melody in their mind. I could sing it right now, but when you hear those lyrics, but see, songs back then were so powerful.
And they were so good.
Yeah.
Because, when Disney did Pinocchio, I don't know when it was, probably in the 40s, but people went to the movie theater and they actually heard this. And the kids came out of that theater, believing this. And if you believe it, it comes true. And it goes back, this shows We say this every week, based on the strangest secret.
Right.
And the strangest secret is like you become what you think about.
Right.
And that's why I think it's very appropriate to start this about Lindbergh.
That's beautiful.
Lindbergh was just a lanky kid from Minnesota who dreamed about doing something so ridiculous that it was incredible.
Unbelievable. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And, you know, back then, whether it be the movie Yankee Doodle Dandy or all these movies, when you left the theater, you were filled with positivity, and people went out of there thinking that applies to me too. What I want to do in my life.
Oh, absolutely.
When
Well,
you wish upon a
it
star.
gives you a push into positive territory.
Yeah.
Because today, I mean, everything is so negative
Right.
that it becomes
Right.
a Woody Allen movie.
Right. Absolutely.
It's so ridiculous. But, you know, I have, you know, if you have a second, I have a bit of good news for people that actually worry about the weather and
good.
carbon dioxide and stuff like that. This is really good news because it'll alleviate a lot of you. There's a shock new evidence that this is from the Climate Science World Division, that there is no link between carbon dioxide and temperature over the last 3 million years.
Wow.
And that stumped net zero activists that wanted to control carbon dioxide. So just be happy. You don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, no, there's one less thing to take off the list.
Yeah, right. Take off the list. So.
You know what I worry about? I worry about carbon monoxide.
Yes,
now,
right.
now that's
Especially
something
in the garage when your car running.
Yeah, that's something you definitely need to worry about.
Exactly.
So, friends,
that one worry about.
Have your furnace checked every fall, because you definitely need to worry about carbon monoxide. Anyway, great segue as always. Thank you for that. I've got the proverbial spring frog in my throat, but I'm okay now. Anyway, let's talk about Charles Lindbergh. For those of you who may not know too much about him, I'm sure you've heard his name. Short story long, Charles Lindbergh was the first human being to cross the Atlantic in an airplane. And let's give you some perspective. So the Wright brothers, December 17th, 1903, flew their airplane, I think for just a couple hundred feet, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah. But it
seconds.
Lifted off the air, and they landed it. And obviously that changed the world. And in 1927, which if my math is correct, 24 years later, this young man who was 25 years old decided that he was going to get in a plane and he was going to fly by himself from Roosevelt, Long Island Field to Paris. And that's like the equivalent of, you know, what would it be, 2002 inventing something, and now you're going to go to the planet Pluto or something like that. It literally was probably one of the greatest feats of mankind to this day. You know, if you think about 1927, the Model T was still in production. You know, airplane, like I said, airplane was less than a quarter century ago. So let's talk about this guy. As Norb said, he was born in 1902 in Detroit, Michigan. He was raised in Minnesota. Obviously, great young men come out of Minnesota, like our wonderful producer, Brian. They raised great people there. He started out as a barnstormer, which was a guy that would take people up for stunts or rides for money in these old Jenny airplanes, they were called. And they barely ran, but he was up there doing all kinds of stuff. He was kind of a daredevil. He became a U.S. airmail pilot, and he was very experienced in flying in dangerous conditions, night, storms, poor navigation tools, and developed strong endurance, discipline, and risk tolerance. Now think about this. No instrumentation, or very little. No, pressurized cabin, nothing. And this guy is flying in the snow, delivering the mail, because the mail's got to come through either way.
Yeah, and I want to jump in and plug the movie, because if you haven't seen the movie, it not only is it a good movie, but it's also very inspiring and it's very true to life. I think Lindbergh was actually a person that actually was actually
consulted on
consulted.
yeah.
So when you see the movie, it's true, and it's kind of funny. There's a story about he actually watched the movie with his granddaughter in a movie theater in New York when it came out, and well, he was over the ocean, and obviously he has a lot of problems. The granddaughter asked him, "Will he make it?"
And he was sitting right next to
And he was sitting right there. Yeah. So,
well, there was a lot of moments where he didn't think he was going to make it. And friends, this is really what we want to stress today is that, we think that these incredibly famous, magical people they're magical and they have some goofus dust on them or makes them different or blessed by God or whatever it happens to be. And this guy was just a human being who had the audacity and the self-confidence to believe that he could do this. Now, I just saw the movie last night, by the way. What Norb is talking about is the Lindbergh's plane was called The Spirit of St. Louis, and the movie's called The Spirit of St. Louis. It was done about 30 years after, so it was done in the late 50s, and Jimmy Stewart, the legendary actor, played Charles Lindbergh. I noticed they even dyed his hair blonde to look more like Lindbergh. But Jimmy Stewart and Lindbergh kind of had a similar physique.
Oh,
they were
they
tall and
tall,
thin.
lanky.
Yeah, tall and lanky.
Yeah.
But let's get into this a little bit. There were several teams of people on both coasts, of the world that wanted to do this. Several French guys tried it. They crashed. As a matter of fact, right before Lindbergh took his flight, a couple of guys died coming from France to New York.
Right.
Several people died. It originally was started because he was this aviator, and there was a $25,000 prize if you could go from New York to Paris nonstop. And he decided he got a hold of some St. Louis businessmen, and he chose a bold strategy. He was the only pilot, single engine plane. His whole idea was it was lighter for a longer range. So he didn't even bring his toothbrush. He didn't bring anything like that.
Right.
And I have to say, I said to my girlfriend, he probably had really bad breath when he arrived in Paris. But that's no one records that for posterity. But the plane, The Spirit of St. Louis, was built in 60 days by a company called Ryan Airplane Manufacturing. Single engine. Now, here's the thing. It carried 450 gallons of fuel.
Yeah.
And the plane probably wasn't much larger than this table, actually, right? I mean, it was a pretty small table. They had gas tanks in the wings. He wasn't even able to see in front of him because there was a giant gas tank in front of him. He had like a little sliding door where he could see forward, or he'd have to look out the side window. What are your memories about that?
Well, no, the interesting thing about him, too, is not only did he have this challenge of crossing the ocean, but, he had to find an airplane manufacturer that actually believed that this could be done.
Right.
And he did find one, I think it was in New York.
Well, Ryan.
Was it? But to make the story short, they said they could build a plane, but he could not be the pilot.
They'd pick the pilot.
So he said, no, I have to be the pilot. So he actually saw himself, which is part of the positive view of life. You have to put yourself in a position of success. And he actually said, no, if I'm not the pilot, I can't do it. So then he went to St. Louis to a bunch of bankers, and they were leery, but they said, well, if you name the plane The Spirit of St. Louis, we'll fund you.
Right.
And he says, I found this guy out in, was it San Diego?
Yeah.
Ryanair. And when he went in there, they were expecting, and they said, well, we're expecting some big shot from the east. And it was Lindbergh, and he was just walking in. They were frying fish.
Yeah.
So he sat down with him, and he developed the plane with him, and he flew the plane, obviously, coast to coast, which proved that the plane was worthy. But the most incredible thing about this, and I happen to have flown a pilot and haven't flown as a pilot for a while, but the interesting part about it, when you think about This was 1927. And to think that an engine would last that long for that trip, to me, that would have been just as scary as the plane.
Right.
Because, I mean, all the components of an engine, and they didn't have the sophistication of today. They didn't have the oils of today. The engines leaked and everything.
And the machining of the parts.
And this guy, he was involved in the design of the plane, and they picked the engine, and he just had this blind belief that he was going to do this because he did not let any negative thoughts enter his mind. And that's the key,
That is absolutely the key. And you're right. I forgot about that first plane manufacturer. They were willing to do it, but they said, we're going to pick the pilot. And he said, no, I'm the pilot.
Yeah, right.
So he said, I can't do it. But
which reminds me of Rocky. Rocky, when he wrote Rocky, Stallone, they offered him, I think, like $1 million for the script. And he says, no. He says, but I'm Rocky. And he says, oh, no, if you're Rocky, we'll only pay you 25%. Then he says, but I get a piece of the movie. And they said, okay. So, it's just this belief in yourself that we're trying. Al and I believe in this stuff. We've seen it work. And this is why we're sharing this with you. And I hope you get something out of it, because with all the negativity today, you have to almost create a shield around you to protect yourself. Luckily, that carbon has been the same for millions of years. That's one thing you don't have to worry about.
Right. That's one thing for sure.
Oh,
well, let's get into a little bit more of the details. And again, the thing I want to emphasize so much is that this was a human being just like us. That's so important for us to talk about that. This guy was Henry Ford, Edison, Lindbergh. They were just human beings like us. They didn't have any divine, inspiration or any. They may have had divine inspiration, but in other words, they were not touched by God and be any different than anybody else. And it really should inspire all of us to go and do whatever we want to do, because these were just
the
humans.
one thing they had, and I just have to say this because I really believe this. What they had was the American spirit.
Absolutely.
And, when some bunch of guys get together, which we should talk more about them, and they say that the most important thing in life is to declare independence and the
life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness,
which nobody had ever done in the history of the world. Carbon dioxide was the same back then too. and it's just amazing. But this is the foundation of the United States. It's nothing else but positive ideas that were put on by our forefathers, that in America you can do whatever you want if you put your mind to it. So when you wish upon a star, the
makes
dreams
no difference
come true.
who you are.
Yeah.
Only America could have produced Ford, Edison,
absolutely,
and Lindbergh.
Absolutely.
Only.
Because this is a crazy country. It allowed us to get away from the shackles of all the European and other countries' thoughts that, permeated through society and locked people in this thought pattern. Here, you can do whatever you want if you set your mind to it.
Absolutely.
Unbelievable.
Let's go back briefly to the plane. So it was a custom-built plane built in 60 days, single engine, 450 gallons of fuel. So basically it was a 450-gallon bomb that he was flying.
It was a flying gas tank.
Yeah, it was a flying gas tank.
Yeah.
Fuel tank was placed in front. He could not see in front of him except for literally like a sliding door. He had to look out the side windows. Actually, there were no windows. He just had to look out the side. No radio, no parachute, no co-pilot, and navigation via compass and what's called dead reckoning. The flight was from May 20th, 21st, 1927, 33 and a half hours solo across the Atlantic. And when you watch the movie, they really dramatize this very well. He nearly crashed on takeoff because it was a horribly muddy, rainy, windy day. He suffered from extreme exhaustion, hallucinations, microsleeps. He flew through fog, storms, icing conditions. and sometimes flew over the ocean very low to just so be able to see.
And also, when you get lower, ice will thaw out of the wings too.
Right. Yeah. There was a scene where he was building up ice.
Right.
And he dropped his altitude.
Yeah.
And again, you think these champions of achievement are some super people. When you watch the movie, again, it's called The Spirit of St. Louis. It's on Amazon Prime, by the way. That's where I found it. I had to pay $350 for it. I'm going to be submitting an expense report if you don't mind for that.
We'll give you $350.
But no, I'll eat that one. It was worth it. But he was hallucinating. He was falling asleep. He was not some magic Superman who was rah-rah for 33 hours.
Well, the problem is that he couldn't sleep that night.
Yeah, he hadn't slept for 3 or 4 days prior to that.
Yeah, because he was so wound up about this that, he couldn't sleep. So, and they didn't have sleeping pills like today or anything like that. So,
yeah,
it's just amazing, really.
Being alone in such dangerous conditions like that can really take a great toll on your mind as well. I mean, I don't know I've never been completely isolated, but there have been moments when all of us have had a broken down car or whatever in the middle of nowhere. This guy was in the middle of the Atlantic.
Oh, no, I know.
For 33, what was it, 30? Yeah, it was 33 hours across the Atlantic.
Right, right.
So it was thousands of miles. And you talk about being alone, constant physical and mental strain. And yet this guy pulled it off because he believed he could do it.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So he lands at Le Bourget Field. I had to ask Norb how to pronounce that because, I'm from Sandwich and we call it Le Bourget, so we wanted to make sure. He was greeted by 100,000 people. Now picture this, you're completely isolated, hallucinating, freezing in the dark, flying across the Atlantic by yourself, basically a Model T engine, which is, right, something similar. And 100,000 people greeted him, and he became an instant global celebrity.
Yeah, but the one thing I think one of the really funny parts about the movie is that he knew by the time that had elapsed approximately where he was.
Right.
And he guided himself with stars because they didn't have any other mode of GPS or anything like that. So all of a sudden he sees a little shipping boat, a little boat, and he goes down and flies around the boat and asks the guy, where am I? And luckily the guy could speak English. He was an Irishman. And he says, you're in Ireland. And from there, then he got himself located and knew how to proceed to the mouth of the Seine, which is in France. And he knew that Le Bourget was, next to the Seine. And,
right.
And he couldn't believe when he saw the lights waiting for him. It was just, if you haven't seen the movie, my God, Chicago had a great show many years ago on a TV station here called WGN, which I wish that they would revive it. It was called When Movies Were Movies.
Oh, yeah.
And that is a movie. Yeah, and watch it. It's just a phenomenal movie.
Yeah, we really recommend it. Again, The Spirit of St. Louis with Jimmy Stewart. And that was only about 12 years after he made It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was that same era. But very sadly, those of you who may know, Charles Lindbergh was also world famous. Again, in 1932, his baby son was kidnapped from his home, and they paid a ransom, and tragically that his son was killed. And it led to a federal kidnapping law called the Lindbergh Law. So that's very interesting, but he was also famous for that. Then he went on, he was kind of a controversial figure politically. He actually was against World War II, eventually, our involvement in World War II, and then actually became, he later became a consultant for the Army Air Corps, pre-Air Force. But you may wonder what happened to the plane, The Spirit of St. Louis. It's in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and I've had the pleasure of I've had the pleasure of seeing it, as you have.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And now that I've seen the movie and done a show about Lindbergh, it makes it much more meaningful that I've actually seen The Spirit of St. Louis.
Yeah, and the Henry Ford Museum in Detroit also has a replica of it, which is kind of nice. And obviously, it's a replica, so you can't, at least you get the experience.
Yeah, I've kind of seen it.
Yeah, and like Al said, it's a small plane. It's like today, like a private plane.
Yeah, it's like a Piper Cub or something.
It held a lot more gas. And
oh, my gosh.
And you know, what we're trying to do with this show, and I hope that some people get something out of it, is that, like Al always says, these are regular people, and they have this idea. I don't know if you watch Shark Tank.
Yeah, I've seen that many times.
But you know, Shark Tank has some really interesting characters, and it overlaps everything. You know, and this is the beauty about the U.S. You know, we only hear about the negative thing, how these people are this and they're discriminated and this, but, you know, there's wealthy people that go there. They're all self-made, all of them. And there's everything in there. There's men, there's women, there's blacks, there's Asians, there's everything. And they're all proud to be Americans. They all say, God, you know, we did it in this country. None of them came from riches or anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now they're very, very successful. They buy into other programs, and you know, just realize this. You know, today, I think the most important thing there is to stay away from negative people. And you know, unluckily, we have a period in our history, which I hope will not last that long, where negativity is the norm. Everything is negative. And, you know, we talk about basic things. You know, we've mentioned the hot water all the time. And if you turn the faucet on, you got hot water. And 100 years ago, people didn't have that. And, you know, you have to be shielded from negativity, negative people. You know, today, everybody has a different idea, and they become very combative. They combat about it.
Combative,
you know? Yeah. Thank you, Al.
You're welcome.
So, you know, I told you Le Bourget, so
yeah, exactly. I owed you one. Yeah, exactly.
Than
so
this. But the interesting part about it is, you know, there's so many wonderful, wonderful things that you have to learn how to get this shield around you.
And only you can do it.
And only you can do it.
For yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Only you can do it. And, you know, I always have some quotes here, and there's a couple of them that are really good. He says, remove yourself if you need to from people that are negative. Look after yourself. It's the most important thing you can do. If you're finding that someone's negativity is really starting to impact you, remove yourself. This might be challenging sometimes in a work environment or family members, but it doesn't mean you can't take a moment, an afternoon, to step out and restore your energy, because we have to. And, you know, we say this every show, you know, being down is part of life.
Right.
We all get down. We all get sometimes negative thoughts. And you got to fight it. It's, again, your mind is like soil. Again, I'm quoting The Strangest Secret.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you plant in it, it will give you back.
In abundance.
In abundance. And if you plant nightshade.
No, in the Strangest Secret recording, you plant corn, it will give you corn. If you plant nightshade, a deadly poison, it will return nightshade in abundance.
And that is how our mind works. And today, there's too much nightshade being planted, and we've got to learn how to avoid it and plant corn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, friends, again, if there's one thing you get out of this show, I don't know about you, but the aspirations I have for my own life are not to get in a completely unproven airplane and fly across the Atlantic for 33 hours. So whatever I have planned for seems pretty doable. In other words, I don't need Lindbergh level courage to do whatever I want to do in my life. And the same thing goes for you. Remember, these people were just human beings like us. And if they could do it, you could do it. And I recently just saw a book title. It was called Much Stupider People Have Done It. That's the name of the book.
Persistence is the key. Thomas Edison didn't know anything about making a light bulb.
Right.
He failed 3,000 times, but he persisted.
That's right.
And Henry Ford, he went bankrupt a couple of times.
Yeah, a couple of times, yeah.
And it's just amazing how easy it is to think positively and how destructive it is to think negatively. And because it's easy to be negative, this is why all these people in politics and the media, which are, I hate to get into a personal thing, not positively minded.
Right, absolutely.
And we have to build a shield around it, that's all.
Well, I'm happy to announce, last thing on for today's show is that Norb will refund everybody their $3.49 if they go see The Spirit of St. Louis on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
So
send me an email.
Yeah, send your cards and invoices to Norb, care of AmericanEagle.com, Des Plaines, Illinois. Anyway, friends, we hope you had a great time listening to the show. We always have fun. Norb, thank you as always.
Thank you.
And
God bless.
For Norb Savanastini, this is Al Edwards. And keep Lindbergh in mind when you're looking at what you want to do in your life. So we'll see you next time. Thank you.